The gynecologist set his stethoscope down and looked at the woman lying quietly on the exam table. Letitia Blake didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the ceiling. Her fingers clenched the thin paper beneath her as though bracing for impact. Beside her, Ebenezer stood still, unsure if he should hold her hand or step away. In 15 years of marriage, he had never seen his wife look so absent. And then the doctor spoke, calm, measured, but what he said didn't sound like medical advice. It sounded like a confession, like someone unlocking a box that had been sealed shut for too long. Ebenezer blinked. Once, twice. His heart pounded so loudly he could barely hear the rest. What did he mean? What was he saying? He turned to Letitia, waiting for her to shake her head, to say it was all a mistake. But she didn't. She wouldn't even meet his eyes. This wasn't about test results. This wasn't about health. It was about a truth Letitia had buried long before they ever met, a truth that explained why she never wanted to see a gynecologist, why she always dodged questions about her past, why they never had children, and by the time the sun set that day, one of them would be dead, because some lies don't just break trust, they destroy everything in their path. Before we dive in, drop where you're watching from in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Ebenezer Blake was the kind of man most people overlooked. 43 years old, broad-shouldered but gentle, he worked the overnight shift as a factory supervisor in Mobile, Alabama. For the past 17 years, he'd followed the same routine: clock in, manage the line, eat lunch out of a black plastic container, and clock out just as the sun peeked over the pine trees. He never raised his voice, never missed a Sunday at church, and never, not once, broke a promise. He wasn't flashy, wasn't loud. But to those who knew him best, mainly the folks in his Bible study group, Ebenezer was a rock. The quiet, dependable kind of man who fixed your fence without asking for anything in return. And then there was Letitia. She was elegant in a way that didn't try too hard. Always polished, always put together. Her dresses modest, her smile gentle, her voice soft like a gospel song humming in the background of a hot summer afternoon. She didn't say much about her childhood, and most people respected that. Whenever someone asked where she was from originally, she'd smile and say, "Up north. Too cold for me." Then she'd change the subject. They met at church. Ebenezer had been teaching an adult Bible class, and Letitia was new in town. He'd offered her a seat in the front row. She said yes. A week later, they were having lunch after service. 2 months after that, he was down on one knee. Most said it was fast, too fast. But those same people admitted they'd never seen Ebenezer look at anyone the way he looked at her. They were married in a modest ceremony, under a white gazebo behind the church. No bridesmaids, no long guest list, just close friends, a choir, and one small cake with buttercream frosting. For 15 years, they built a quiet life together. No big vacations, no extravagant holidays, just routine, prayer, and the comfort of knowing someone was waiting for you when you walked in the door. But there was always one quiet gap in their story, one unanswered question that lingered like a shadow they both learned to ignore. Children. They never had any. And every time someone from the church asked if they planned to, Letitia would offer the same carefully rehearsed reply. "Health complications," she'd say, followed by a warm smile that closed the subject. Ebenezer never pushed her on it. He'd seen the pain in her eyes once when a child ran past them at the grocery store. That was enough. She didn't need to explain. He believed her. He trusted her. For over a decade, that trust had never been tested. And yet, for all their years together, Letitia had never visited a gynecologist. Not once. Whenever Ebenezer gently brought it up, usually around the time of her annual checkups, she'd brush it off. "I already know what's wrong with me," she'd say. Or, "It's too expensive right now." But this time was different. This time, she was the one who asked him to come with her. She booked the appointment. She picked the clinic. She even asked him to hold her hand during the consultation. It seemed like a step forward, like maybe she was ready to face the medical issues she'd quietly carried all these years. Ebenezer didn't ask questions. He just showed up, sat beside her, and waited. What he didn't know was that this wasn't a step toward healing. It was the beginning of the end. Ebenezer didn't question much at first. That's just the kind of man he was. Quiet, steady, the type who believed love meant patience. But something about Letitia had started to shift. It was subtle at first. Small things, easily missed if you weren't paying attention. She stopped sitting with him during church service, started locking the bathroom door, something she never used to do. Her sleep became restless, and then came the pain. It started as a stomach ache, then cramps, then whole days where she couldn't get out of bed. He begged her to see someone, offered to take time off work, but she resisted, hard. "It's just my old issues acting up," she'd mumble, forcing a smile. "It'll pass." But it didn't pass. It got worse. One evening, he came home from a late shift to find her curled up on the kitchen floor, drenched in sweat, her lips trembling. He nearly called an ambulance, but she stopped him, swore it wasn't an emergency, said she just needed rest. That's when the questions began to grow in his mind. He started looking around, not to snoop, but to help. He opened her drawer in the bathroom, hoping to find a heating pad or maybe some old prescription he could refill for her. But what he found made his hands stop moving. A small white pill bottle. The label slightly faded but still readable. Hormone replacement pills. That alone wasn't strange. But the name printed on it wasn't hers. It read, Leo Brandt. At first he thought maybe it was a pharmacy error. Maybe she was picking up medication for someone else. A relative. A neighbor. He tried to ignore the knot forming in his stomach. But something about it didn't sit right. Leo Brandt? Who was that? Why was she hiding medication under a different name? He waited until dinner that night to ask, "Baby, I found some pills in the bathroom. They weren't in your name. Everything okay?" Letitia didn't look up from her plate. "They're old," she said quickly. "From years ago. A mix-up. I meant to throw them out." "But who's Leo?" Her fork froze for half a second, barely noticeable. Then she smiled. "Just a cousin. It's nothing. Don't worry about it." But he did worry, and from that moment on, nothing felt right. She became more distant, started spending more time in the guest room, claiming she needed space to rest her body. Her phone never left her side. She changed her passwords. One night, he tried to hold her like he used to. She gently pushed him away. "I'm just tired," she whispered. Still, Ebenezer held on. Maybe it was stress. Maybe the pain was changing her mood. Maybe there was something she wasn't ready to share yet. He didn't want to accuse. He just wanted the truth. So, he called Chantel, Letitia's only close friend. The two women had been thick as thieves since Letitia moved to Alabama. Chantel had even stood beside her at their wedding. If anyone knew what was going on, it would be her. "Is Letitia okay?" he asked over the phone. "She's been acting off." Chantel went quiet. Then came the hesitation. "She's fine, Ebenezer. You know she's private. Don't push her too much. That woman loves you." "But does she trust me?" he asked. Chantel didn't answer. That silence said more than any words could. It was no longer just a feeling in his gut. Something was truly wrong. Letitia wasn't just hiding pain. She was hiding herself. And the more he searched for answers, the more she closed the door on him, emotionally, physically, even spiritually. And yet, he still didn't see the full picture. Because what Ebenezer didn't know is that Letitia had built her entire life on one secret she never thought would be uncovered in a doctor's office. It was a Monday morning. Rain fell lightly against the windshield as Ebenezer guided their old gray Camry down the two-lane road toward the clinic. Letitia sat beside him in silence, her hands resting in her lap, fingers laced tightly. She hadn't said much during breakfast, just sipped her tea, barely touched her eggs, and kept glancing at the clock like she wanted time to slow down. Ebenezer tried to keep things normal. He cracked a small joke about the weather, asked if she wanted to grab lunch afterward, even reached across to give her hand a light squeeze. She smiled weakly but didn't speak. Her hand, in his, felt cold. They pulled into the parking lot just after 9 a.m. The waiting room was quiet, except for a young receptionist chewing gum behind the desk and an old couple flipping through outdated magazines in the corner. Letitia checked in, and Ebenezer filled out a few lines of paperwork while she stared blankly at the wall. Then a nurse appeared at the door, clipboard in hand. Letitia Blake? She stood, adjusted the hem of her sweater, and followed the nurse down the hallway. Ebenezer stood to go with her, but the nurse stopped him gently. "Doctor wants to speak with her alone first," she said. He nodded, confused but cooperative, and sat back down. The wait felt longer than it probably was. 15 minutes passed, then 20. When the door finally opened again, the doctor, a tall man in his 50s with tired eyes and a clipped tone, walked in and nodded toward him. "Mr. Blake, would you mind joining us in exam room 2? The hallway felt tighter somehow, the walls closer, the air a little thicker. He entered the room to find Letitia sitting on the exam table, eyes red, her hands trembling in her lap. She didn't look at him, just stared at the floor. The doctor shut the door quietly behind them, cleared his throat, and then spoke with careful, deliberate words. "Mr. Blake, I want to be sensitive here, but there are some medical inconsistencies in your wife's examination that I feel obligated to disclose. I want to assure you, we didn't jump to conclusions. We ran basic checks, blood work, physicals, nothing invasive." Ebenezer glanced at Letitia, confused. The doctor continued, "Your wife's anatomy. It doesn't completely match the physiological standards we expect in cisgender women. There are surgical markers present, but also undeveloped features consistent with incomplete gender-affirming procedures. We also noticed hormone therapy indications not listed in her medical history." Letitia's breathing picked up. Her face was pale now, lips parted like she wanted to speak but couldn't. Ebenezer blinked. Once. Twice. What was this man saying? That his wife wasn't a woman? Letitia stood suddenly. "I need air," she whispered, then rushed past them, down the hall, and out the exit door. Ebenezer remained frozen in place, heart pounding. He didn't know what to say, what to think. A minute later, he followed her out to the parking lot where she stood near the car, arms crossed tightly over her chest, eyes darting everywhere but toward him. "Letitia," he said, firmly but gently, "talk to me, please." She didn't respond. "I need to understand. I need you to tell me what's going on." And then, finally, she did. Through choked tears and shallow breaths, Letitia began to speak. Slowly at first, then all at once, like a dam breaking. "My name wasn't always Letitia," she said. "I was born in Ohio, as Leonard Brandt. I transitioned years before I moved to Alabama. I left everything behind, my name, my records, my past. I changed everything. I started over." Ebenezer said nothing. He felt like his bones were made of glass. "I didn't mean to lie," she continued, voice cracking. "I had the surgery, or part of it. I ran out of money before it was complete. I thought I could live with it. But then I met you, and you were kind, gentle. I fell in love with you, and I was terrified." She wiped her face with her sleeve, her eyes now pleading. "I thought if I told you, you'd hate me, leave me. And I couldn't lose that. I couldn't lose you." Ebenezer looked at her. Really looked. At the woman he'd built a life with. The woman who'd held his mother's hand as she passed away. The woman who made sweet tea every Sunday afternoon. Who stayed up with him during his night shifts just to make sure he got home safe. Who prayed over his headaches. Who called his niece every birthday without fail. And now, she was someone else. Or maybe not someone else. Maybe just someone he didn't fully know. He leaned against the car. silent, a storm of thoughts clashing in his head. How long had she carried this? How many moments in their marriage had been shadowed by this secret? How could he not have known? He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, stunned, because the woman he married wasn't who he thought she was. And now he didn't know if he was furious or betrayed. That evening felt different. The kind of evening where the walls of a home, once filled with trust and laughter, begin to echo back the sound of silence. A silence so thick it settles on your skin like dust. After they pulled into the driveway, Ebenezer didn't speak. Letitia tried, twice, but the words caught in her throat like broken glass. He walked ahead of her into the house, stiff, distant, barely glancing back to make sure she was behind him. She closed the door softly. He dropped the keys on the counter without looking. The sun had nearly set. The sky outside faded into a moody amber, casting long shadows across their modest living room. A framed photo on the wall, taken years earlier during a church retreat, showed them smiling, side by side, a couple that looked sure, whole, unbreakable, but the people in that photo were gone. Ebenezer stood by the sink, staring into it like he could find answers somewhere in the scratches on the steel. Letitia hovered in the doorway behind him, hands wringing at her waist. She spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, Ebenezer, talk to me." He didn't move. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said again. "Everything I did, every decision I made, it was because I loved you. I was scared that if you knew, you'd hate me." Ebenezer turned slowly. His face was tight, his eyes dull with something colder than sadness. "You had 15 years to tell me," he replied flatly. 15 years, Letitia, and instead, you built a life on a lie." "It wasn't a lie," she shot back, desperation creeping into her voice. "It was my truth, one I didn't know how to share. I was born Leonard, yes, but I became Letitia long before I met you. I became the woman you loved. I am her." "You're not the person I married," he muttered. "I'm exactly the person you married," she insisted. "I cleaned your wounds. I cooked your meals. I buried your mother. I stayed up with you when your brother died. I prayed with you, for you, every single day. I've been your wife in every way that mattered. But you never gave me the truth. I gave you everything else." The shouting began. It rose and fell like waves crashing against a crumbling shore. Neighbors later said they heard it start sometime around 7:10 p.m. At first muffled voices, but then sharp, angry. A woman pleading, a man shouting, furniture hitting the floor, a glass breaking. According to the police report, one neighbor called her husband into the room just before 7:40. She said something didn't feel right. And then it happened. At exactly 7:43 p.m., a single gunshot rang out. Clear, loud, final. By the time authorities arrived, Letitia was lying face down on the bedroom carpet. Blood pooled around her, a crimson halo beneath her shoulder and chest. Her eyes open, motionless. The house was quiet again. Ebenezer was sitting beside her, cradling her body in his arms, his shirt soaked in her blood. His hands trembled violently as he held the phone to his ear, the 911 dispatcher trying to calm him down. I didn't mean to, he kept repeating. His voice was cracking, breaking, collapsing beneath the weight of what he had done. She lied to me. She lied to me for 15 years. But I didn't mean to do this. The recording of that call would later be played in court. 7 minutes long. Grief, confusion, devastation. No longer the composed, soft-spoken man the community knew. What they heard was raw, broken, bare. When the officers entered the room, Ebenezer didn't resist. He didn't protest. He didn't even ask what would happen next. He simply placed the revolver on the floor, raised both hands, and whispered something to himself under his breath, again and again, so softly that only the closest officer heard it. She should have told me. She should have told me. She should have told me. And just like that, the quiet life they had built, Sunday services, home-cooked dinners, porch swings and morning devotionals, was over. Gone in a single pull of a trigger. Within hours, the quiet neighborhood in Mobile, Alabama, became the center of a national firestorm. News vans lined the streets. Reporters huddled beneath umbrellas as rain continued to drizzle softly over yellow police tape and shocked onlookers. Neighbors who once nodded politely at Ebenezer and Letitia from their porches now stood frozen, arms crossed, whispering about what really went on behind closed doors. By sunrise, the headlines had already begun to appear. Husband kills transgender wife after shocking discovery. From church pew to murder scene, the truth that triggered a bullet. Trans woman gunned down by husband after years in hiding. Cable news anchors debated the motives. Online forums exploded with opinions, some mourning Letitia as a victim of hate, others defending Ebenezer as a betrayed man who'd been living a lie. The court of public opinion split right down the middle, louder and more vicious by the hour. Local LGBTQ+ groups organized candlelight vigils just days after her death. Dozens gathered in front of the courthouse, holding signs that read, "Say her name, Letitia Blake," and "Trans lives are not disposable." Speakers called out the violence faced by trans women across America, especially those who lived in secrecy out of fear. For many, Letitia wasn't just a victim. She became a symbol of a larger ongoing struggle. A reminder of how easily silence can turn fatal, but not everyone saw it the same way. In other corners of the country, and even within the local community, support grew for Ebenezer. Letters poured into the county jail, some from fellow church members, some from strangers. Many painted him as a man misled, a man who gave his heart in good faith, only to have the foundation of his marriage shattered by what they called an unforgivable deception. Talk radio hosts fanned the flames. Some questioned why Letitia didn't tell him the truth sooner. Others argued that love should have transcended biology, that if Ebenezer really loved her, he would have understood. But the conversation was never simple. It was messy, personal, loaded with pain and politics. Police continued their investigation, combing through Letitia's past. There were no signs of criminal activity, no restraining orders, no prior history of domestic violence, just gaps, large ones. Her transition had been done discreetly across state lines under a different name. Leonard Brandt had disappeared from public records nearly 2 decades ago. She'd legally changed everything before moving to Alabama: driver's license, Social Security, even her birth certificate. She never shared those details, not with friends, not even with Chantel. To everyone in that church, she was Letitia from day one. No one ever asked more, and she never offered more. And so, the questions began to pile up, not just in the courtroom, but in living rooms and workplaces across the country. Was this a crime of passion, or something darker? Did Ebenezer truly snap in a moment of emotional collapse? Or had the resentment and confusion been building for longer than anyone knew? Was this a human reaction to betrayal, or a calculated act disguised as grief? The courtroom would wrestle with those questions. So would the public. But the one question no one could answer, not the prosecutors, not the defense, not even Ebenezer himself, was this. Was this an act of passion or premeditated hate? The court and the world couldn't agree. 9 months after the fatal shooting, the trial of Ebenezer Blake began. By that time, the tragedy had already taken on a life of its own, no longer just a courtroom case, but a lightning rod for the nation's most painful debates. The courthouse steps became a war zone of ideology. Rainbow flags waved beside signs that read, "Truth before marriage" and "Stop transphobic violence." Inside the courtroom, cameras weren't allowed, but the tension was so thick you could feel it through the transcripts, the sketches, the whispers from journalists who lined the pews. People weren't just watching this trial, they were invested in it. It wasn't just about Letitia and Ebenezer anymore. It was about identity, trust, gender, marriage, and rage. The defense opened with raw emotion. Ebenezer's attorneys painted him not as a cold-blooded killer, but as a man whose entire world had collapsed in one unimaginable moment. They argued it wasn't hatred that pulled the trigger. It was heartbreak. A crime of passion, they claimed. A man blindsided by a truth so explosive, so destabilizing, that he suffered a sudden break from reality. They pointed to his 911 call, howling, sobbing, incoherent. They presented his clean criminal record, his years as a dedicated church member, his volunteer work, his reputation for kindness. And they leaned into a single, haunting idea. He didn't know who he married, and when he found out, something inside him broke. But the prosecution had a different story to tell. They called it intentional murder, calculated, deliberate, and rooted in control, fear, and transphobia. They said this wasn't about betrayal. It was about power. That Ebenezer didn't just react, he punished. That when Letitia's truth shattered his constructed image of masculinity, he chose to erase her instead of understanding her. They brought out key evidence. A gun registered in Ebenezer's name, easily accessible in the bedroom. His internet search history from months before, where he visited forums questioning Letitia's femininity and what to do if your partner is hiding something. And then they introduced the witness who changed the entire tone of the trial, Chantel, Letitia's closest and perhaps only true confidant. When Chantel took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. She didn't speak with anger. She didn't cry. She looked directly at the jury and told them the truth. Letitia had been scared, not just of losing her husband, but of what he might do if he ever found out who she used to be. Chantel read aloud texts from Letitia, screenshots time-stamped just 2 weeks before the murder. "I don't know how to tell him. I've tried. Every time I try, he looks at me like I'm the only good thing in his life, and I just can't ruin that. Sometimes I think he senses something, but he brushes it off. If I disappear, promise me you'll tell them I loved him. I really did." The courtroom was stunned. Letitia had planned to come clean, not out of guilt, but out of love. She was preparing to leave, Chantel said, preparing to protect herself, maybe even start over. But she wanted to try honesty first, and she never got the chance. To the prosecution, those messages were proof. Proof that Letitia had been in danger, that she had feared what would happen when the truth surfaced. Proof that Ebenezer didn't just snap. He anticipated it. The cross-examination was brutal. The defense tried to frame Letitia as deceptive, even manipulative. They suggested she was playing a dangerous emotional game, leading a man into a marriage under false pretenses. But each time they pressed, Chantel responded calmly. She hid her past because she was afraid, not because she was evil, because she wanted love. She was terrified of what the truth would cost her, and it cost her her life. The courtroom sat in stillness. Even the jury, who had been instructed not to let emotion cloud judgment, seemed visibly shaken. Outside, the media circus reached fever pitch. Cable pundits clashed every night, some framing Ebenezer as a victim of psychological betrayal, others calling him a symbol of how dangerous intolerance can be. Hashtags trended by the hour. Justice for Letitia. He deserved to know trans lives matter. She lied, snapped. What should have been a murder trial turned into a cultural referendum. And with every passing day, the line between right and wrong, love and hate, truth and safety, became blurrier. Because this case didn't come with clean answers, only scars, and the jury? They would soon have to decide, was this a man pushed past his breaking point, or a murderer hiding behind a moment of shock? After 6 grueling weeks in court, with over 40 witnesses called and hours of harrowing testimony laid bare for the world to dissect, the moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. The jury returned to the courtroom. 12 men and women who had carried the weight of this story now held its fate in their hands. There was no sound, no camera clicks, no coughing, no shuffling, just breathless silence. The 4 persons stood, looked down at the paper. We, the jury, find the defendant, Ebenezer Blake, guilty of second-degree murder. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Ebenezer's shoulders slumped. His mother covered her face. Letitia's sister wept quietly in the second row. The judge, a stoic presence throughout the trial, handed down the sentence the following week: 22 years in state prison. No possibility of parole for the first 18. And just like that, it was over. Or so it seemed. Because the court's verdict didn't silence the debate, it amplified it. Across the country, op-eds poured in, commentators clashed, and social media boiled over. Some called it justice served. They said Letitia's life mattered, and the court finally recognized that. That transgender women, especially black transgender women, are too often killed without consequence. That this case sent a message. Identity is not an excuse for violence. But others saw something more tragic. They called the case a failure of human connection, a failure of honesty, a failure of acceptance, a failure of law to fully grasp the raw, emotional chaos that can explode when secrets and shame collide in a marriage. They called Ebenezer a broken man, not a monster. A man failed by systems that don't teach us how to love without fear. A man whose actions were unforgivable, yes, but maybe, somehow, also inevitable. Then came the statement from Letitia's family, brief but devastating. Letitia lived in truth even when she kept it hidden. Her truth didn't deserve death. Her journey was never meant to end in tragedy. We loved her before the transition. We loved her through it. And we'll love her long after the world forgets her name. In the months that followed, Letitia's story became part of college lectures, community panels, and national debates. Her photo, bright eyes, soft smile, appeared in candlelight vigils, in documentaries, on murals in neighborhoods where girls like her still live in fear. As for Ebenezer, he disappeared behind the walls of a medium-security prison in upstate New York. No interviews, no apologies, just silence. But the world around him would never forget what happened in that small home on the edge of Brooklyn, because this wasn't just a murder. It was a reckoning of gender, of love, of truth, and of what happens when the secrets we hide collide with the people we love most. In the aftermath of the verdict, something deeper lingered, something that couldn't be captured in a sentence, or a soundbite, or a news headline. This wasn't just the story of a marriage ending in murder. It was a story about truth and how we carry it. A story about identity and how it shapes, and sometimes shatters, the lives we build around us. It was about love, but also about fear. Fear of not being accepted. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of what happens when the person you love most sees you fully and turns away. Letitia had lived two lives, one that the world could see, and one she carried alone, in silence. And that silence, it cost her everything. She loved him so much, she erased herself, Chantel said in a recorded interview. She gave him the version of herself she thought he could handle, not because she wanted to lie, but because she was terrified he'd leave if he saw all of her. That single quote haunted the trial. It still haunts those who knew Letitia. And then there was Ebenezer, a man raised in a conservative household, a man taught to define love by rules he never questioned, a man who thought he knew what was real, until his reality was rewritten in a single sentence inside a doctor's office. A police officer later said, "I've seen crimes of passion, but nothing this complicated. You can't untangle this one without cutting through a lifetime of culture, fear, religion, identity." And maybe that's the hardest part to admit. This case didn't leave us with answers. It left us with questions, difficult ones. Is withholding the truth about your identity a form of betrayal or self-preservation? Can love survive without full transparency? What happens when someone's truth is too heavy for the person they love to carry? And what do we call that moment, the precise second, when love turns to violence? Some said Letitia deceived Ebenezer. Others said she protected herself the only way she knew how. And in the middle, a storm of grief. Grief for a life lost, for a future undone, for a love story that was never safe enough to be honest. The case exposed the fractures in how society talks about gender, about relationships, about consent and truth. It forced people to pick sides. But maybe the real tragedy was that there were no sides, just two human beings, broken in different ways, colliding at full speed. And what's left in the wreckage is a mirror, a reflection of how far we've come, and how far we still have to go. For 15 years, she lived in the shadow of a truth she was too afraid to speak. 15 years of rehearsing the moment she'd tell him, of staring at him across the dinner table, wondering, will he still love me if I say it out loud? 15 years of loving him fully, while hiding parts of herself completely. And he lived in a version of reality that felt whole. But it wasn't. It was built on smiles, shared memories, and a silence so carefully crafted it felt like honesty. He loved her, but not all of her, because he never knew all of her. And in the end, two people who once promised forever stood on opposite sides of one unbearable moment. A moment where everything shattered, one secret, 1 second, one gunshot. It wasn't just Letitia who died that night. A version of Ebenezer died too, the one who believed he could ever go back to the way things were, the one who thought love, once broken, could be unbroken. And maybe that's what makes this story so human, not the crime, not the courtroom, but the aching reminder that the things we don't say can destroy everything we build. So now we ask you, do you believe secrets like these, kept out of fear, are forgivable? Or do they cross a line too deep to heal? Let us know what you think in the comments. We want to hear from you. And if this story shook you, made you pause, made you feel, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe for more true stories that dig beneath the headlines and into the hearts of real people. Because sometimes, the most unbelievable crimes don't start with violence, they start with silence.